The only way it's going to be able to be paid for is through higher taxes, especially if the Democrats are going to try to do the budget reconciliation. That means the bill is going to have to somehow be paid for. They can't continue their deficit spending spree, and you're going to have to raise taxes on more than the very wealthy people, as Chuck Schumer said it. Every working American is going to pay more. Every small business is going to pay for it. Therefore, they're going to pass those increased taxes onto the consumer. So at the end of the day, if this bill goes through, every American is going to have to pay more on top of all the inflation that every consumer is already seeing, which that in itself is a tax increase.
As a reminder, Congressman, here is what is in the infrastructure bill. A few things of note that we want to point out. The legal status to millions of immigrants, focusing right there on pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds, free community college. Pretty short on infrastructure, if you ask me. But, you know, for somebody like me, I've got a kid looking at that free pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. That's something that, you know, might be interesting to me. How can you, as a Republican, deal with how heavy this is on handouts when you're trying to run in 2022 and 2024? Because let's face it, people do like free.
People do like free, but there is no free lunch. And when you look at free kindergarten and free tuition, that's going to come at a cost. Children may go to kindergarten for free, but their school supplies are going to cost more. Their school clothes are going to cost more. The everyday expenses for their parents are going to cost more. So at the end of the day, this is a phony bill. It's not going to do anything to help the average American. There's very little infrastructure in it. We're all going to see higher taxes and more inflation. So I'm very disappointed the Republicans in the Senate are going along with this. I know they're going to pass a bipartisan infrastructure bill, but following this infrastructure bill, as you said, it's $3.5 trillion worth of unnecessary spending that's going to add to inflation, and at the end of the day, it's going to hurt the economy.
I want to focus for a minute on that strengthened border security portion of this, because I understand $107 billion in funding would go towards immigration initiatives. Number one, I'm curious if we know what those initiatives are. Number two, do you think that this is in there perhaps to try and sway some of those moderates in light of everything that we've seen happening at the border?
That's probably in there to try to sway a few moderates who are getting killed back home because every American is frustrated that the Biden administration won't secure the border. However, I have zero confidence that any new spending will do anything to deter the flow of illegals across that border. The Biden administration needs to be specific on exactly what they're talking about with respect to immigration spending in that bill, but they're not going to be. And it's very disappointing that so many members of Congress are going along with this bill, especially Republicans, when we don't know what the bill actually means. We are not 100% certain on where all the infrastructure goes. When you talk about $110 billion for roads and bridges, my first question is, where exactly are those roads and bridges going to be built? And I just think that we're giving too much authority to the Secretary of Transportation and the Biden administration on this huge blank check.
Not surprisingly, if you don't like it, Bernie Sanders does like it. Here is a tweet outlining his thoughts. For too long, Congress has ignored the needs of the working class, the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor. Now is the time for bold action. Without getting too wonky, can you please quickly explain how the debt limit plays into all this? Because this seems to be something that nobody's talking about, and it could be the big factor here.
Well, this used to be an issue in Congress. Republicans used to care about the deficit. And for whatever reason, over the last few years, many of my Republican colleagues have not been as concerned about the deficit. But Janet Yellen said this week that we're going to have to vote on the debt limit increase. We cannot continue to pass massive deficit spending. So this debt limit vote, something that hopefully conservative Republicans, and if there are any conservative moderate Democrats out there, which I don't think there are any moderate Democrats that care about the deficit, but we need to make sure that the Congress has to pass a debt limit increase to be able to continue to spend like this, or else they're going to have to increase taxes. So either way, it's a bad deal for Americans, and I just hope that this bill goes down in flames.
And real quick before we let you go, you touched on inflation at the beginning of the segment, but if you can just expand on what this would do for inflation.
Well, it's going to increase the cost of everything. More government spending is going to continue to increase inflation. That's what we saw when Biden passed his first bill with absolutely zero Republican votes, that $1.9 trillion stimulus bill after the economy had already been overstimulated, to be honest. So this is going to be another $4.5 trillion of more spending. It's going to, I mean, can you imagine what it's going to cost to actually build a road and bridge under the Biden administration because of the inflation? And then you add in the labor shortage, and it's just not a good deal for the taxpayers. Until the Biden administration gets inflation under control, I don't think we need to be focused on spending trillions of dollars to stimulate the economy.
Otherwise, we start seeing $25 a gallon milk, and nobody wants that.
That's right.
Congressman James Comer,
right.
thank you, sir.